not Yorick from Hamlet. This is one of my ancestors, Cornelius Burley. Born in 1804, hung in 1830. He's not particularly infamous for being hanged. Rather, he's infamous because when they hung him, the rope broke the first time and they had to hang him a second time. And thereafter, his body was donated to science, where the medical students did dissection and whatever on him. And unfortunately for him, his head was taken by an American phrenologist named Orson Fowler, who took him on a lecture series, a tour across America and Europe. In fact, it's purported that even Walt Whitman and another author, Mark Twain, rubbed this man's head. Now, the science itself is pseudoscience because they believe they can predict the behavior of a person from the thickness of the skull and the bumps on the skull, etc. Anyways, a rather macabre way to go. The head itself was donated to the Harris family in London, Ontario in the late 1800s, and at some point after that, the top of the skull was cut off and the skull was used as an ashtray for some time. It eventually was found in a museum, the Elder House Museum in London, Ontario, and finally the skull was interred with the rest of its body, which was buried in Michigan in 2001 by my relatives on the other side of the border. Anyways, this is Cornelius Burley, and he was one of my ancestors. It is not clear if Cornelius in fact killed the constable, although he did confess before he was hanged, and that confession was transcribed, and I put that in quotation marks because there's no chance that this man wrote this confession. It was just too well written. It was likely written by Reverend Jackson himself, and he may have embellished or even coerced. We're not certain of this. I mean, the man was described in one newspaper as poor, ignorant, weak-minded, and almost an idiot. That pretty much gives you an idea of the fact that he probably didn't write this very long soliloquy that was read out at his hanging. Anyways, the Reverend Jackson obviously had a good hand in that. And it's also not clear if he in fact did the murder because there were no eyewitnesses, though a lot of the evidence seems to point that he was definitely in the area. He was staying with the other family, his cousin and son at the time, and it's possible one of them did. They did threaten to kill the constable and his colleague at one point, but it's not clear who did the shooting. So anyways, we're not certain who did the shooting. But what I did like was the confession itself, and there's some interesting parts in this. Like I said, the man was poor, ignorant, weak-minded, and almost an idiot, and that sounds really familiar when I'm talking, probably referring to myself. Anyways, so when I hear people write things like, I sincerely pray that I may be acceptable in the sight of the Almighty God and have a tendency to check the progress of evil and prevent others from doing as I have done, it's not likely a person who cannot read and write and is described as poor, ignorant, and weak-minded would likely say something like that, even in 1830. I do like some of the other description in his confession. I have always been wicked and thoughtless. I never was instructed to read or write, so there's the hint that he couldn't read or write. And of course, the last part was the best, and definitely something I cannot imagine him saying. I was often found in the merry dance and lost no opportunity of inducing thoughtless and unguarded females to leave the paths of innocence and virtue. Well, can you read that out? Can you imagine the 3,000 spectators listening to this, hanging on every word as Reverend Jackson puts a little gospel into it at his hanging, especially since the poor man, the rope broke once and he had to be hung the second time. And it said, on the second time, he walked up the gallows to meet his death with stature and virtue. So take that as it will. Anyways, there is people that believe he was not guilty, but there's no evidence to prove he wasn't, and the confession certainly says he was. And he did say in his confession that The other people had no hand in the killing. Therefore, he accepted all responsibility. So he was either protecting his cousin and son, or this was written by somebody else and just didn't want to stall the inevitable. Enjoy.